Help me get my ugly tears out now. Make my focus her and not me. May I look at what she is gaining and not at what I am losing. Help me to release her fully into your hands. And then, as we prepare to drop my son off at the airport in January, I can't even imagine the scene in my mind without ugly crying. But Lord, if that is where you want him to go, direct his steps and calm my fears.
Welcome to Little by Little Homeschool Podcast, where you'll learn tips and strategies that will empower you to home educate your children. I'm Lee Nguyen, a homeschool mom of over 12 years, which includes 2 graduates. When I started homeschooling, I was pretty much on my own and was desperate for encouragement and help. My mission is to be a source of encouragement and help to you. Whether you are just beginning your homeschool journey or you're deep into the homeschool lifestyle, Little by Little Homeschool wants to help you stay the course, because all the time you are investing into your children is completely worth it. If you're ready to take your homeschool to new levels, keep listening.
This funny thing happens when we have children. We have these sweet little babies and become toddlers and preschoolers, and you could have a house full of young children. And as moms, we think, this is the season that is going to last me forever. I'll be 90 years old and my kids will still be little and needing me to pour them things, or they will pour it themselves and I'll be cleaning up spilled milk often. But guess what happens to every single one of us? I was the same way. I thought, surely my kids will never grow up, because this season of the constant needs and so much that has to do with home education and discipleship with them will never quite end. It just felt overwhelming and honestly exhausting. And suddenly, here I am having to open my hands and let them go. Today, I want to share with you whether you are finding yourself in that season of beginning to let go, middle of letting go, or you have let go and you're like, am I the only one who's thinking this way? Possibly. You have young children. I encourage you to listen so that you have this already in the back of your mind. It seemed like nobody talks about this and nobody talked to me about it. Now I go and talk to everybody about it because I think it needs to be talked about. And I want to talk to you today about the hidden reality of our homeschool children growing up and leaving home. This is purely my speculation and my observation just from my own experience. And this is not to say that parents that have kids that are in public or private school experience this less. But I feel like there is this deeper, gut-wrenching pain that comes along with letting go of our homeschool children because they've been by our side, whether you have been homeschooling for just a couple of years or their entire childhood. It doesn't matter. They have been with us for so much, and suddenly they're leaving. And I just think it makes it harder. Now, we've been able to cultivate such a deep relationship with them, right? Because we've had all of this quality time along with the quantity time. And that quantity time, it just becomes something that they're just a part of our lives. They're just in our lives. And then suddenly to be like, oh, they're not. And again, I'm not saying that parents who send their kids to school feel any less sadness or feel any less remorse or any less grief, but I feel like it just is intensifies when we homeschool because we are so used to them being around. And that was my experience. They were here, whether they went off even to camp for a week or went to a co-op just for a couple hours every single week. I knew that there were times where they were away, but it wasn't consistent. It wasn't on a daily, weekly, monthly, and most of the year kind of basis. In just a moment, I'm going to share with you three realities that the homeschool mom needs to accept as we begin to let go of our children as they grow up and want to leave home, whether leaving home means going to a gap year program, going to college, going to work at a job, going to live with maybe roommates, or who knows, whatever that might look like. They are getting ready to kind of step out onto their own, whether it is for a long periods of time or short periods of time. I had written a prayer and I want to share that with you. I wrote this prayer as my daughter. So she graduated from homeschool in 2021, and then she stayed home that rest of the year. and went to a gap year program. It was 2 semesters. So in 2022, she did the winter spring semester, came home for the summer, and went back for the fall semester. And at that time, we knew that she was going to be accepting a position to come on staff for the ministry that she was doing the gap year. So I wrote this at the end of the summer, I guess probably about August or so of 2022, knowing that when we brought her to the second semester of her gap year program, she would be home for Christmas, but then that she was committed to working there. Now, this wasn't like we were driving her or flying her across country, and we still can get to see her, but it's a day of fare to get out there. But she's also just not right around the corner. And I realized that she was stepping out and she was moving on to something. And so at that point, she was just about 19. At the same time, I had graduated my second born, and he was still at home at that point, and he was working on his business. But at that time that I wrote this prayer, he was preparing to go on to his gap year program, which was going to start then in January of 2023. So I knew that I had a couple of months of getting used to her being gone again. And then I would be sending him off to a gap year program where he was gone for uh, 4 or 5 months, and he was headed out to a gap year program in Africa. So he was not going to be anywhere nearby. We didn't even know if we would have any communication with him at that point. And so at that point that I'm writing this prayer, I was very used to my kids being around. It was hard. It was a big adjustment for her to be gone for a couple months, but then she was home for the summer and life felt better, felt normal. I was like, okay, I had a little bit of reprieve, but I knew that I was going into 2 big times of letting go. And so this is what I wrote. And I don't give out my kids' names and stuff like that. So I'm just going to say 1 for her, I guess, or I'll say my daughter, and then 2 or my son. I think I'll do that. I'll say my daughter and my son in place of their names in the prayer. But I said in this prayer, Lord, I barely got through dropping my daughter off last January. As I anticipate her driving off next month, help me get my ugly tears out now and when she isn't around me. Help me to only display excitement around her. Make my focus her and not me. May I look at what she is gaining and not at what I am losing. I don't want her thoughts to be about how I am doing. Help me to release her fully into your hands. And then, as we prepare to drop my son off at the airport in January, and I just need your help. I can't even imagine the scene in my mind without ugly crying. But Lord, if that is where you want him to go, direct his steps and calm my fears. Why is it so hard to let children go? And will I ever get used to my heart walking around in the world without me? I had no idea this was a part of bringing children into the world. I had no idea they would become my world. And as I have walked through that, I'm going to tell you right now, it was rough. As I sat in my backyard and I went through a book, I have this prayer written in a book called Release My Grip by Cami Gilmore. And it really helped me to walk through the stages of grief and process what I needed to process. And I sat in my backyard alone and I just bawled my eyes out. When it comes to my kids, I can be pretty emotional. When it comes to reading, we'll say sappy books. There's so many read alouds, and my kids are like, oh, here she goes. She's getting choked up, and I'm trying not to. Just family and relationships just really, really can get me. So, yes, I will be one that will cry at a commercial sometimes. But I just knew I had to get it out, and I did. There was a lot of ugly tears, and I felt like my heart was just being ripped out, but I knew I had to walk through that, and so that book was a really great resource, so I recommend it to anybody who is, at the point of beginning that journey of releasing and letting kids go, or maybe you have let them go, and you still have things to work through, so I recommend that. Now let's jump into the 3 realities that a homeschool mom has to accept as we begin to release our grip, as that book says, and we let our kids go and we launch them out into the world. And the first one is having to accept how quickly the season of having little ones around really was. Like I mentioned earlier, it felt so long. But suddenly we get to the point where, like, wow, that went really fast. And as you start to realize, wow, this season, if you're in that season of littles right now, it is going fast. We can't always slow it down. But when we start to realize how quickly that season went and how quickly the season is, even as you maybe are raising older children, tweens, teens, whoever is living at home, that this season will go by really fast as well. And when I began to realize this, I was able to slow time down. No, that doesn't mean I was able to stop the seconds and the minutes, but I was able to get myself to a place of being more in those moments, trying to lessen the amount of things that I wanted to get done, needed to get done, put aside my to do list more, and just sat and just thought and pondered and made sure I got enough rest so that I was able to then be fully present and to enjoy my kids and to be able to continue to create opportunities for us as a family to be able to connect and just linger more. I would say that would be a good phrase to say, is just to linger a bit more. And so we have to accept that that season of little ones really did end up going by fast at the time. It felt very slow, and I am not diminishing that at all. It felt very long and very hard for some years, and it will for you too. And then suddenly, I honestly think that once kids hit the teen years, those years fly by because there are opportunities they want to try. They want to go and do this, they want to go and do that. They want to get jobs, and maybe they have some friends they want to see. They want to travel and do this, and they want to take this class or study this, and then they get their driver's license, which can be a blessing. I have found where my kids that I'm, like, so not wanting them to have their driver's license, but so oftentimes, when by the time they get it, I'm like, "Okay, good," because I am so over all of the driving that I need to do, and I am very excited for my youngest now to have his driver's license, which means here in the winter, I don't have to drive over to pick him up at 9:30 at night. I don't have to bundle myself up, go out, sit in the car, warm it up because he's been wanting me to drive his car, and his car is old car, so it needs a little bit of warming up. So I'm excited that I don't have to do that. So the season of littles really does go by quickly. Enjoy it, capture photos and videos, but don't make the focus that every single moment has to be photographed and every single moment has to be recorded. The second reality that homeschool moms need to accept is that your identity is no longer wrapped up in your kids. Now, am I saying that it is right that your identity is completely wrapped up in your kids? Not necessarily. Stay with me here. Our identity is in Christ. Our identity is a child of God. Our identity comes from what he says about us, right? We also need to have a focus on our husbands, on our marriage. But let's be honest, we can spend time in the word and devotions and letting that sanctify us and letting the season of life sanctify us. But our kids, they just hold our hearts, don't they? They just like, I'm just enraptured by my kids. And I had no idea that I would just love being a mom so much. I didn't have any plans of having children when we first got married. Huh, that wasn't a good thing to hold back from my husband. We just never talked about it, which is kind of super weird. But as our kids launch, we start to realize, okay, I'm not no longer Susie's mom or Bobby's mom. I'm actually somebody else. And for me at this point, my oldest is 22 years old. And so I still have one at home. Well, I still have both the boys at home, but I'm not really my 20-year-old. He kind of comes and goes and stuff and needs me for some things, enjoys my cooking and that kind of stuff. But it's mostly still my 16-year-old that I'm still, a bit wrapped up in his life. But basically, it's been 22 years that I've been a mom, and it's been a very big role in my life, just like for you. Whether you've been a mom for 5 years, it's been a big role, right? It'll be a big role at 10 years, 15 years, and it always, I think, is. But at this point, as our kids start to launch, to leave, we have to learn to just be us. Just be you. Just be who God created you to be, a person, a daughter of the King. And even though all that time you're spending, I really hope and pray, you're spending on your relationship with God, you're spending on your relationship with your husband, the shift happens with our kids and our role as mom changes. You start to notice as they get older, they don't come to you for everything. Remember when you have really little kids and pretty much anything they're thinking comes out of their mouth, right? And I don't know if you started to notice a shift as they start to think things in their head. And then you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, there is actually an inner monologue." For a while, my kids and if you especially if you have a child that's more of a talker, you're like, "There is no inner monologue. Everything is coming out." But even with those that are talkers, their inner monologue becomes bigger and their thoughts are not always shared. with you as they all get older and as they get even older and ready to launch. They have their own life. You have walked alongside them to grow them into the person that hopefully you have worked hard to grow them into the person that God wants. And they know their gifts, their talents and abilities. And at this time, we need to start to learn to be ourself, to be our new self, because as I have very openly mentioned, homeschooling and motherhood is a great and huge sanctification tool. And so who are you as a person now? When our kids all launch, think about your youngest launching and how different you are or will be at that time than from when the very first day you became a mother. The third reality that I'm going to leave you with here, and then stay with me because I have an announcement for you, okay? You don't want to miss it. The third reality is that them leaving your home is about them. It's not about you, which sounds so simple. But I came to this reality, and I'm going to flip to another page in this book because I wrote this down. I said, their entire childhood is about them. So why does it suddenly become about me when they're leaving? I need to turn the focus back on the child and what they need from me, not what I want from them. When our kids are young, it is about them, and not that it's about them in a selfish way. But mom is the one who has your back all the time. And especially with teen boys, I'm like, no, 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 I'm not working against you. There is nobody in the world that wants more or better for you than I do. They don't always see that, but I think they come around. But them leaving is not about you, the mom. Yes, there's going to be some grieving. And that's what I was like, okay, I have to take some time and I have to grieve and I have to work through this process. I need to spend time in prayer. I need to be in the Bible and scripture so that when am communicating with them, when I'm interacting with them, it is about them leaving. And I tried to remember how I felt when I was launching out, going to college, and then after college, getting an apartment, and then getting married, how excited I was. Who wants to look over at mom and seeing her bawling her eyes out? No, I'm not saying on the wedding day that there won't be some tears, but I found for myself that it's best for me to work through those emotions so that in that moment, I can be there for them and I can be excited for them. And like I mentioned in that prayer earlier, I don't want my kids to be out in the world and doing great things and loving where God has them and be like, oh, I hope mom's okay at home. Now, I don't think they really are, but I don't want them to be, oh, I broke mom's heart. No, it didn't break my heart at all. I just had to walk through this process of grief. And so just remember during this process, their leaving is about them, not you, but you have to work through it. Work through it yourself, work through it with God. Talk to your husband. Make sure you have someone to talk to about it. And maybe you have a homeschool mom who's going through it similarly. I have been able to connect with homeschool moms and we just have a look in our eyes. We're like, yep, I know exactly how you're feeling and how this is going. And it's okay to work through this stuff. We don't need to burden our children with those thoughts. And that doesn't mean we don't say, I'm going to miss you or I do miss you. That's okay too. But it's also understanding their personalities. And maybe that will make them feel bad. Then don't say that. But just, it's okay for them to know that you're sad because you love them. But if as you are dropping them off at college or they are about to board a flight for something and you're sitting there bawling your eyes out, it's not going to be a great start for them. So work through your grief on your own. So those are the three realities that I have found for myself that I need to accept, and I wish that somebody had spoken this over me, and that's why I'm speaking it over you. Before we close out, I want to let you know on Monday I have a big announcement, and it is something that I have not ever offered here, and you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be like a limited time thing that I'm going to be sharing with you. So make sure you come back before we go ahead and ring in the new year. Please come back and listen to Monday's episode. I thank you for being here at Little by Little Homeschool Podcast. Have a blessed day.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.